Should Christians watch R-rated movies? Did the widespread Crowdstrike outage expose our over-reliance on technology? And can the gospel be found even in the mass CGI spectacle of disaster movies? We talk about all this and more on this episode of Faith and Pop Culture. Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 20 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined at the desk, as I always am, by the groggy eyes to my jet lag, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
Oh, how appropriate, Daniel, as I have that exact condition.
You were my muse for that intro, because you just...
I appreciate that, yeah.
You have a little jet lag right now.
I do have a little jet lag. We just got in yesterday from the west coast of Canada. We were up visiting family on the west coast there on Vancouver Island, Victoria. Beautiful, trying to bottle all the cold weather and bring it back down here to the south to no avail.
But the truth is that you just couldn't wait to get rid of, away from that temperate climate and beautiful scenery in order to get back and do a podcast with me.
That was what was driving me. I said we could stay a day longer, but I told Daniel
pack the kids up.
I'd be back here. I don't miss podcast day, so here I am.
Very noble.
For better or worse.
We are excited that you have also joined us this week just to get into some interesting topics as far as, hey, what do we do as Christians to navigate, engage with, critique, support, create all this crazy culture that we find ourselves surrounded in. And there are a couple, I think, fascinating kind of topics, both topical and I think kind of more general, of just sort of principles of, hey, how do we approach entertainment and, make wise choices. And kind of the big one that I thought we could start off with, the heavy hitter, is it's something that I know we've talked about before or touched on. And I know it's just a question that pops up a lot for Christians when it comes to, movies and how, what movies do we watch? What movies are maybe inappropriate for Christians to watch? And that is the old R-rated movies. You can just throw that into Google and you'll find a bunch of questions and stuff like that. That has always been just one of those things that, Christians are like, hey, what do we do with these sort of movies? Like, I feel like most of us feel, like PG-13 on down, fairly comfortable as Christians. But kind of the R-rated is more the Wild West. Like, what do we do with this? And it's kind of been on my mind, too, because the big movie coming out this week is Deadpool and Wolverine, kind of the MCU, the first time that he has been in the MCU, the Marvel universe coming over from Sony, and kind of marking the first MCU R-rated movie. I think a lot of people have, become accustomed to, what the Marvel Cinematic Universe is. And this is something a little different, a little extra raunchiness sprinkled into the fray. And it seems like it's also like, some of this was, I guess, maybe expected because the previous Deadpool movies were both R-rated movie, and as it got crossed over, they maintained that. But there seems to be more of an openness to go in this direction, because I know even Kevin Feige, who's like the godfather of the MCU, kind of pulls all the strings. He's been talking about they've been working on a Blade movie for the MCU, which he's very heavily hinted at will also be rated R. And even just like some of the interviews that he's done, like promoting this, like there's one that was going viral on the social media this week, where he said in an interview, "I'm so glad I can say F bleep now. So excited I couldn't do that before." So he's excited that, hey, he can get a little more R rated. So I thought we could get into that a little bit, because it does seem, because I was sort of trying to dig into some of the research for this, like it does seem like there's more like, I don't know if openness, but like it's almost a bit more mainstream than maybe it has been in previous years. Because even as pulled up some data that of the last 7 of the top 10 all-time kind of earning R-rated movies have come out within the last 8 years. Kind of if you start at the first Deadpool, 7 of the top 10 have come out, with movies like Joker or Oppenheimer, one of the biggest movies that come out last year, which is R-rated. And obviously some of that is, I think, just inflation, that new movies tend to make more because, hey, movie tickets cost more. But I do think that there is perhaps more to it than that. So maybe we can start there, and then we can get into kind of movie rating systems and, hey, what do we do with R-rated stuff as Christians? But does it seem to you like R-rated stuff is more prevalent, or is it?
Yeah, I was wondering if there are are there more R-rated movies that are hitting theaters now than before? Did any of your research show that like? I just think it's at least it feels like there's more like a higher quantity of R-rated movies coming to theaters, and at least back from like when I was a kid, when I could remember. But again, being a kid, you probably aren't as aware. But it seems like there's more. There's like a higher volume of R-rated movies.
And I feel like I wonder if some of it too is streaming, which isn't necessarily like theatrical movies.
Yeah.
But like one of the big things about streaming is they weren't tied to like the cable like restrictions for what they could do,
or the theatrical restrictions.
Yeah, so they can just they can put whatever they want. They can put gratuitous sex and swearing and all tons of violence and stuff, and they can kind of get away with whatever.
It was sort of the place that that a lot of these films go, and you think of things like Game of Thrones and stuff that like they could just do what they want to, and it's kind of the Wild West. I feel like streaming, and so I wonder if some of that has kind of normalized the higher ratings for theatrical releases.
Yeah, I think maybe people got more used to it. Even like I saw like this a couple of days ago, there's a big headline thing for like the Rebel Moon, Zack Snyder's kind of failed Star Wars kind of.
Isn't it getting like an R?
But it's getting like an R. Everything he does gets the Snyder cut. And it's the headline sort of with way more violence and sex and it's sort of like
as it was intended to be.
Yeah,
which I think was kind of because I heard an interview with him specifically, but like he always wants to do like that's almost in like his contract with the studios. It's like I'll make this like studio friendly PG-13 version, but I'm also like I have to be able to release like the version that I want, which is always going to be R-rated. And so it's just kind of interesting sort of behind the scenes there, but yeah, it does seem like it's more prevalent and I think more mainstream, and it's not just some they're not just these sort of more niche movies, and I think maybe Deadpool has likely been the driver of that as far as like the main one that people think of when it's like a mainstream.
Because I feel like if the first Deadpool movie had done terrible, then who knows? But like, I feel like there wouldn't be as much of but like as soon as that did well, like with audiences critically and financially, like it's like studios are like, okay, we can get away with this. And obviously not every property can do that. Like like an R-rated Paddington Bear or something. But like there are things that it seems like are maybe better suited for that approach, and now executives are happy to do that. But maybe let's just start with the rating system itself, because I feel like I kind of want to get into break down, hey, what does it mean to be R-rated, and as Christians, how do we? Because that's sort of a sweeping term that encapsulates.
That's a big tent.
Not all R-rated movies are the same or R-rated for the same reasons, and so we can kind of get into that. Maybe just start a bit with like just the movie rating system, because I feel like in some ways, even the question of like, hey, can Christians watch R-rated movie is almost like a flawed from the start. Like it's almost not that it's a bad question or like that it's not a helpful in any way, but
which I think we have, like ironically enough, I think we have an article on our website called "Can Christians Watch R-Rated Movies?" So only because that seems to be the question that like
are you
people
calling me a hypocrite in the middle of a?
Well, no, I'm just saying like that's the headline we use because that's what people say, and so hey, we might as well use that.
I'm a hypocrite in other ways. Just that. But yeah, that is when people are searching stuff, like that's what they're searching for, and it's always been interesting to me because I feel like there is a pretty heavy trust by Christians in like the movie rating system, which is not like a Christian system. Like that's not
a perfect system.
Or
it's like well, everything PG-13 on down is totally fine to watch. It's like I'm sure there's lots of PG-13 movies that you probably shouldn't watch.
Yeah, and even just like sort of what gives things their ratings that they do is arbitrary. Like at some point it wasn't like they found like a tablet from Moses or something that God gave. It's just at some point some people in this industry sat down in a room and they're like, hey, how many F words can we have in a PG-13 movie? One? Okay, that sounds about it wasn't like it's
there's no science to it, I don't think.
And even like you can tell because it changes. Like I always try and when I'm trying to get my wife to let me like show my kids some movies that maybe they're being 9, like Jaws, that they're not quite maybe ready to watch. I'm like, well, it's rated PG. Like, it's because like movie ratings have changed. Like what,
Right.
a lot of stuff, like, especially PG-13, and, before, I think, Indiana Jones, Temple of Doom, there wasn't even a PG-13. It was just like PG or like, whatever the most extreme rating was. Like, so like, even just going back in like
Yeah.
a couple of decades, the entire system is different for like what would be, like, it's like, well, are Christians okay to watch this because it was labeled PG, even though if it came out today, it would definitely be R.
Yeah.
But because of the time frame is this never being, I would say I think it's like a flawed system, but like it is helpful in some ways. But I think it's a better starting point than an end point. Like, I think it is helpful to be like, it gives you a heads up. Okay, this is rated R, so there's some reason, some content stuff in it that, hey, as a Christian, I can kind of look into, and sort of from there, kind of do your research and figure out if it's, if it's something that you should be watching, rather than like, well, if they say it's R, then, God himself might as well tell me not to watch that movie because, it's obviously inappropriate. Like, I think it works. It's less helpful as like the end point. That just, even if it is, hey, we always want like simplicity, I guess, in our decisions.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, and especially I think as like parents trying to navigate entertainment choices for our kids, it is sort of it's a shorthand. It's an imperfect shortcut to sort of seeing, okay, is this something that's okay for my kids to watch or not? But like you said, there's lots of like even PG movies that I don't think my kids should watch just because of the message of the movie. It's like, well, I don't know that like you really should. Like, you have to go beyond just the surface of, do they say bad words in this movie or not? But as busy parents, it's like, well, like it's better to have some sort of like everybody's looking for the cheat code to like, okay, well, can I just say yes or no? And then, because I don't want to have to do the research, I don't want to have to look into it. And so I think there is maybe too heavy a reliance on some of these just industry rating systems to say, oh yeah, well, it's G or PG or whatever, that's fine. But then you watch it and it's like, well, I don't want like my kids growing up to be brats because of this dumb like animated movie or whatever. And going by just the rating system, you would think, oh, it's fine. And so yeah, it's one of those things where you unfortunately have to do more work to figure out.
I think the real answer is you just go to the collision.org and you just read my reviews.
Exactly. Well, you're welcome for that setup, Daniel.
And then you don't even need to do. No, I think parents should do. And there are, collision.org is a good one. There's other resources and stuff that.
Maybe even the best one. Who's to say?
People are saying that it's among,
some say
among the best. But maybe we can get into like sort of like R-rated. Again, like, there's a part of this discussion as far as like you alluded to, like there's stuff in PG movies that Christians should be discerning of, and like there's messages and stuff. Like that's sort of the one side of the don't fully trust the movie rating system.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll probably get into that at some other point. But as far as just like focusing on like R-rated movies, again, I don't want this to be like a should you go watch Deadpool if you are, shame on you kind of movie. Like, that's just sort of the launching pad for, I think we can make our own choices. But as far as like what makes R-rated thing, because there's really kind of 4 things come into play, I think, with all the ratings, which is language, violence, sex, kind of the big 3 as far as content. And then I think just like themes, not necessarily like, like atheistic or not ideologies, but you often see like, mature themes, like if it's dealing with, even just like a very sensitive, like, sexual abuse or something like that.
Yeah.
That sort of sexuality, but it's not showing like, it doesn't mean there's like sex and nudity. It just means it's, or any kind of abuse, or things like that. That's just more like heavy material. That a
depression, those sort of themes,
like suicide would probably fall into that, where it's not like, it's sort of violence maybe, but it's mostly kind of mature themes. So there's sort of the 4 of those. And maybe we just kind of quickly just sort of look at, hey, what does the Bible say about each of those? Because I'm not sure that like they're all should be weighed the very same. I think there's the Bible speaks to different ones of those in different ways. But just sort of language. I know we've talked about this before. I think in context of like profanity in kids movies. We got into it because
Oh,
that's
yeah.
one of my soapboxes right now is like they keep putting profanity in kids movies and just doesn't need to be there. Although if you sort of look at what Scripture says, and obviously it's difficult because Scripture doesn't tell us how to watch movies, or even like how to go to the theater. Like it wasn't. It was concerned with things beyond entertainment.
Yeah.
And even people that it was writing to didn't necessarily have a lot of recreation time and entertainment. So you don't always get like this the one-to-one verse that the proof text that answers the question like
Right.
you might like. But I do think it does speak more generally. And the Bible does speak again, about like Ephesians 5:4 or Colossians 3:8, where it says, nor should there be obscenity or foolish talk or coarse joking, or in Colossians where it says, rid yourself of these things, anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. So I think there's no question that the Bible speaks against like just and people make the argument about like, well, what is a profanity? This wasn't a swear back then, and like I think
It's just a word,
it's just
Daniel.
a word,
Why do you have
like,
to be so uptight about it?
like and it's like, well, back in the day they wouldn't even know that this word was bad, and language changes, and I don't know. I feel like that's missing the point of it. As a general rule, it's just saying like, let what comes out of your mouth be wholesome and not corrupt and filthy and coarse.
Yeah.
And I think we know intuitively what that is. Like,
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of coarse language that isn't like swear words as well. And so I think oftentimes we think about like, cuss words or swear words or whatever, but there's a lot that falls under filthy language or like coarse joking that doesn't have any like swear words or bad words in it, but it's still like very inappropriate talk or joking or whatever. And so I think that's something else to also keep in mind, that like it's not just, hey, you said a bad word. It's like, the joke you're making or the innuendo you're giving here is very much filthy language or coarse joking and that kind of stuff. And it's like it doesn't have to be like you said a bad word. It was like the content of your discussion was definitely not wholesome.
Yeah, I think the Bible speaks more like broadly than even a lot of us. Well, as long as I don't say this list of 6 words,
Yeah.
I'm good. But I think the Bible speaks more broadly. At the same time, so I think it does. Don't let coarse language come out of your mouth. To me, that is different though, and I don't want to get like overly cute and like I can try to dance on the line, but like hearing someone speak a profanity is not the same thing as having coarse language come from your mouth. Like I think
Right.
There are other settings beyond entertainment where is it a sin? You're like hanging out with people and they're not believers, and you're in a setting that they're comfortable with, and they start swearing or something like, and you're not. Is that a sin because you were exposing yourself to coarse language? Like, I don't think I don't think many people would say, well, that's not really a sin. I think the same can apply in some ways to profanity in films. Like,
Yeah.
and we'll get into it doesn't necessarily mean that it's, open the floodgates and, give it to me. How many more F words? Like, I love profanity. I think it's not, a lot of the verses people use to say, okay, Christians cannot watch a movie with profanity in it, isn't necessarily being faithful to what the scriptures say.
Yeah, well, it just falls apart when it's like, well, a lot of Christians work in environments that are very profane, like, and I've had jobs where like I've done construction work, and it's like those aren't like wholesome environments, when you're building houses or repairing roofs or whatever, and the guys you're with are just like turning the air blue with their language. And it's certainly like no one would say, well, you should, just not work because, people at your job use bad language. Like no one would say that, I don't think. And so, that, I think that argument about using these passages as an argument against not hearing bad language, I just kind of think doesn't really work.
Yeah. And I think there's a difference between like a movie, a harsher movie that's dealing with mature stuff that can have some heavy language to it, which like I'm about to preview a movie called Sing Sing, which seems like that kind of movie. Like it's in a prison and they talk harshly, but it's not a raunchy movie.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a difference between that and just delighting in the raunchiness of like
Yeah.
profanity. So like, I think it can be something inappropriate, but maybe it's a bit more nuanced. I think the same, you can say the same about violence too. Just that, can Christians watch violent movies? Like, I think the Bible itself has quite a bit of violence in it, and some of it is quite graphically described. I wouldn't necessarily use that with your kid for nighttime devotionals, or wait till they're older. And I think kind of in the same way with the profanity, I think the Bible very clearly teaches that Christians should not be violent people.
Yeah.
But Scripture also very much is honest about the fact that like, we live in a violent world.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the same principles of the profanity can apply in that way of like, is all violence wrong to like be exposed to? I think like, unless the Bible's inappropriate. Like,
right.
No, like I think there are definitely instances of violence that isn't. Doesn't necessarily mean like all violence is edifying or good, or that we should like just delight in like slasher movies and, people dying. But I don't think just because it has violence and because it has even graphic violence, that necessarily like puts it out of range of like what Christians should. And obviously, like, war movies are the one that people usually bring up.
Yeah.
Although I think it's broader than that too. I think the one where it does get more tricky, and then we can kind of sum this up, is when it comes to like the sexuality. And like, to me, of the sort of the big three, the sexual stuff to me is the one that rises to the top. Is like Christians should be, the most discerning of, because obviously the Bible speaks very clearly, against sexual immorality in various contexts, but it also like there's also a lot of sexual stuff in the Bible. Like Song of Songs is, like it's a little risque. It's a little 50 Shades of Grey at moments. Some of those passages that
It certainly is.
Some of the metaphors used and stuff is, thankfully it'll go over your kids' head, and even just describing like uncomfortable situations. Like we in our Sunday school class, we were going through Genesis, and like when like Lot's in the cave with his daughters, and they both get pregnant. Like like this, things get a little things get a little dicey.
How did that happen? Yeah.
So I think the Bible, it at least demonstrates to a degree that like sexuality is a part of who we are in our life, and like it's not out of bounds for Christians to explore that in art. I think art should explore some of that because art explores real life. Where I think the sexual stuff kind of becomes different, diverges from even the violence and the profanity, is sort of the more like active participation to me. Like you watch someone committing violence, maybe it desensitizes you, but you're not necessarily like participating in that act. Or like someone's using profanity, and maybe you're so immersed in that like eventually you start saying it subconsciously and it can impact you, but you're not necessarily the one that's having coarse language. Or I think like sexuality, like, a graphic sex scene, 2-minute sex scene in a movie, like that's designed to like stimulate and like, like it's, you participate in that intentionally. It's supposed to be like real central and like do something to you and stir these emotions. And I think like those feelings of like lust and stuff, like the Bible does speak against that. And I think, I think we can say, oh, it just doesn't affect me. But I don't know. Like, I think the sexual stuff, at least when it comes to like the actual like depiction of like sexual acts and like nudity and that stuff, that to me is like kind of the hard line for me of like, I just want to, I don't think we should really play around with a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. And it is very much a different, I think a different category than the language and the violence for sure.
Yeah. And so I do think that is the one, like when it comes to new movies and stuff, like that's one of the first things I'll just sort of make sure of before, because I think I can navigate some of the other stuff a bit more. And real quick, we don't need to get into this one, but this like the more mature thematic stuff, I think that's fine. Like I think obviously that can mean a lot of different things, but there's almost a sense in a lot of like Christian cultural engagement that like family friendly is the default, and like you see a lot of people like we need to make we need to affirm, this movie affirms family values and stuff, and it's like, well, like I'm all for that, but like that's not the only thing. Like the appropriate Christian movie isn't one that like I can enjoy alongside my 9-year-old, and like they should be able to watch everything that I watch.
Right.
They're 9. Like there's things that mature situations and stuff that I feel like we as an adult should be able to like watch and like process. that, hey, my kids can't.
Right.
That's fine. When they're, when they're in their 30s and not 9, like they'll enjoy that too. So I do think that one kind of opens it up. And kind of maybe just to wrap this in a bit of a bow, kind of the two verses that came to mind as far as like the R-rated stuff is 1 Corinthians 10:23, where Paul says, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible, but not everything builds up. And then Matthew 10:16, which is a verse I use a lot, which says, Jesus saying to his disciples, behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. I think kind of those two verses taken together provide, I think, the best, I guess, like foundation for like how do we approach this question. That, like, I think Christians can lean too legalistic when it comes to that. Like, well, if it's R-rated, I can't see it and you're a bad Christian. You might not even be a Christian if you're going to see it.
Right.
Where I think, like we start with liberty. We start with freedom. Okay, we have freedom. We're not bound by these legalistic things. But like the Matthew verse, like, but we need to be wise about that. And we are called to a sense of holiness that we can't, that we shouldn't take lightly. So I think more the question is not just, hey, is it R-rated bad? PG-13, probably good. It's just like, hey, is this a wise choice? Like, it's not necessarily even sinful on its own in many cases, but like, is this something that builds up? And like, is there value in me watching this? Or is it just raunchiness for raunchiness sake? And
I think it's also just a reminder that we don't live in a vacuum either. And most of these kinds of verses, it's in the context of you're living among other believers, and like even thinking about the whole, that's a whole side topic, but the whole alcohol debate among Christians as well. It's like, yes, technically are things permissible, sure, but it's like, is that a wise choice? Living among the people that you live with, is that a good idea? I guess basically is what it comes down to, in context of you're with other believers. Everybody's kind of at different places in their journey, and it's like, sure, maybe you could do this or that, but if you're walking alongside other believers, how will your actions impact those who are with you or watching you? And so I think that is something to also keep in mind.
And I think it's even like, could say it's even like a more spiritual approach. Like, I think, people that, could frame, well, hey, you're saying R-rated movies are okay. Like, Christians need to have standards, and, that's, watering down. Where I feel like sort of the more like things are permissible, but not everything is beneficial. Like, discern day by day and like trust the Holy Spirit. Like, I feel like it relies you to actually be more in tune with sort of your convictions and faith, rather than just sort of on the front end, like, well, the secular movie system said this is R-rated, and I'm not going to watch that under any circumstances, unless it's The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson.
Yeah.
Then it's okay. But like any other R-rated movie must therefore be bad. Like, in some ways, that's almost a less, I think, like, you rely less on like wisdom and discernment. Because you're just sort of relying on a more legalistic template. But hey, I know it's definitely it can be a controversial one. I kind of feel like the Deadpool Wolverine movie is going to fall into the, at least for me, because like I have not seen the first two, because I was like, not because they're R-rated, because it just seemed raunchiness for like the sake. Like, the selling point was that they say raunchy things. I was like, I don't want to go see that. But now that I'm reviewing movies, I was like, well, I probably should go see this. So we'll see what I feel. I can't say I'm super excited, but maybe next week on the podcast we'll break down a bit of sort of
a few more thoughts,
how I felt. But kind of another big thing, which again thought we'd just at least touch on, happening, shaking things up in the country of ours, is technology can be our friend.
Mm-hmm.
It can also
when it works.
When it works, which is not all the time. So kind of a crazy thing that many of you probably were even impacted by was sort of like the CrowdStrike kind of Microsoft outage. So if you're not familiar with it, if you weren't one of the many millions of people affected by it, CrowdStrike, as far as I understand it, is like a security, you kind of download it on your computer, and it keeps you from
cybersecurity.
Keeps attacks and things. And I think a lot of people, as we have found out in the last couple of weeks, or the last week, a lot of people take advantage of that. Well, they went to kind of do a new update And as anyone that's ever tried to update technology knows, like,
Hold your breath.
hold your breath. Like people often say, like, don't upgrade your device until like a week or two later
Yeah.
to work out the bugs. Well, a lot of people didn't do that. So this upgraded and then basically shut down every computer, or at least like every PC, kind of Microsoft computer that was running this, and just resulted in like pure chaos. Because like,
Yeah.
like I don't know how many. Like I noticed like Delta flights because they used it for their booking and some of that. Like
Not only for their booking, but also for their, at least Delta used it for their like flight crew scheduling. So it was like kind of a double whammy, I think, for Delta.
yeah, like last I saw, just Delta like has canceled like over 5,000 flights or something like.
Yeah.
And I know like other airline like basically shut down.
Yeah, and this was not just like the States. Like this is a kind of a global catastrophe in the tech sphere.
Yeah, and even like that's like a lot of the attention is being on like the like air traffic because that's like impacts most directly and it's easy to track.
Yeah.
But like this is shut down like things like aspects of the police department or fire departments or like
And hospitals and
like,
banks and
school. Like there's so many areas that it's like okay because they did a new update that wasn't compatible apparently. Like
yeah.
I guess we just can't function in our which again as an Apple person I feel
You look
good.
down.
I
You look down your
on
nose at all these Windows users.
check 1-0 on the scorecard. So it hasn't necessarily impacted me directly, but it is fascinating to me because I feel like
Yeah.
in so many ways, I guess as a society, to take a modern society, like we're so prideful of our advancements, and like there's always a sense, no matter what time you live, that like the time you're living is the most like we've got it figured out, and we're so advanced, and all these technology, we can fly across the world in a couple hours, and you're flying to Canada, and then it's like such a small thing, and everything kind of gets pulled away, at least temporarily.
Yeah.
And I think it exposes a lot of like maybe just our over reliance on technology.
Oh, for sure. And I think it also just is interesting that like for all our advancements, such a little grain of sand can just bring the whole thing to a screeching halt. And so I think it's fascinating that like, yes, we are super advanced, but it's like, but if the computer stops working, then like you're not like you're back in the Stone Age apparently, and so it's fascinating that it feels, we feel so advanced and yet, one small thing can strip you of all your so-called like advancements in modernity and all of this. And not to be a Luddite or anything, but I think it is a great reminder that like we're not much without our computers in this day and age, sadly. And I think also the importance, I think a lot of these companies are realizing the importance of redundancies and building robust systems and not just highly advanced systems. And so I think it's, it's a great wake-up call, I think, for a lot of these companies.
It definitely is like humbling. It's much lesser degree, but even in a different situation, but like something like COVID or like some of these things, or even just like in my neighborhood, every now and then like the power just goes out. I say I don't have internet. It's like, oh, what am I gonna do? I guess I just don't work this week. Like so much of what I do, I need the tech. I need internet. And, just like I don't know. I think it just puts us in our place a little bit, and I think that's healthy. As Christians, I think it's healthy just as people to remember like. For as advanced as we are, like for as high as like our Tower of Babel has gotten, we are still just like meek little mortals at the whims of other powers. But speaking of meek little mortals at the whims of greater, higher powers.
I was hoping you were going to do a good segue there, Daniel.
I saved that one up just for you since you came all the way back for me. But twisters, tornadoes, that can also put us in our place. And no one wants to see a real tornado. I mean, not a lot of people want to go see one unless you're a crazy storm chaser. But hey, you can go see one in the movie theater. So Twisters, kind of the big movie of last week, came out, and like it seems like Twisters are popular now. Like people are digging the twister. So this movie, I think, was projected to make like $50 million in opening weekend. Made over 80 million, kind of way overshot all the the forecasts and stuff, which made it the biggest opening day weekend ever for a disaster movie, which beat the great Dennis Quaid movie, The Day After Tomorrow, which had made just under $70 million. This is interesting to me. I always, whenever a movie does well, like I always sort of wonder why. Like, what does that say? Like, why do so many people? Sometimes it just says it's a good movie. People like good movies. Sometimes there's not. You don't have to go a whole lot deeper than that. But I do think it. And I think as Christians too, like, what is it about these types of movies? Is it just that, hey, it's a good movie and people need to go see something? There's nothing else playing that weekend, or is there more to it than that? And again, encourage you guys to check out my review. I think part of it is a good movie. I enjoyed this movie. I like disaster movies. But there's sort of two aspects of this that I thought we could maybe just briefly touch on. One is just sort of the nature of can you actually find the gospel in disaster movies? But another part that I think is helping this movie is there's a quote that kind of went viral right before this movie came out with director Lee Isaac Chung, where he talked about his decision not to include overtly talk of climate change. And he said, I wanted to make sure that we are never creating a feeling that we're preaching a message, because that's certainly not what I think cinema should be about. Then I think he goes on to say, I don't want it to distract from the fact that movies are to entertain you, just to a platform to preach. What do you take from that quote? Is that?
I mean, I think that's the quote of a very smart director, because I think that is true. Because if you've ever, I'm sure most of us have had this experience of being watching a movie, and the message is so clunky and on the nose that it takes you out of the experience of the movie. And I think that's just really bad writing. It's really bad directing when you're being preached at, because it's whether it's breaking the fourth wall or just usually it's dialogue between two characters, and you're like, oh, okay, we're supposed to be the dumb guy who doesn't know what's happening here, and we have to be explained to by some smart expert or whatever the movie may be. And so I think what he's saying is I mean, that's exactly right, and I think that's what people want in movies. And regardless of whatever the message is, and there will be message that comes through, but ideally in a much more organic way than just you horrible humans are ruining the planet. There can be a way more nuanced way
without smuggling in a TED talk. Right. The thing with the Twisters movie is you can easily read between the lines, and the character is talking about how there's increased tornado activity and all this. They're clearly, at least it seems, implying climate change and some of that, but it's not like that the director didn't have a viewpoint, or he's not even that didn't filter into sort of his movie, but there's a way to do that without, like you said, kind of turning wink nod to the audience of and what will you do to combat climate change?
Right.
There's a way to do it without hitting people over the head, and I do think that is because I think this movie is doing well based on word of mouth because it's exciting, but I think also just it's in some ways inoffensive. It's not.
Yeah.
It doesn't treat people like they're dumb. Even set in rural America, and in a very positive way that's not always the same in Hollywood.
Right.
There's a lot to it that I think just kind of invites you in to enjoy this movie. You're not going to get a bunch of extra junk on the side of this thing, and I think that still sells despite what Hollywood might think.
Well, and I think that's absolutely right, and I think this is a testament that you can make those kinds of movies, and they do sell, and people you don't have to have sort of the big H Hollywood agenda smuggled in there necessarily to make movies good, or maybe not smuggled in, but overtly in there to make them successful or whatever. And I think this is just proof that you can make good movies that aren't about either of the coasts and sort of the flyover states as they're known.
But even you compare this guy's quote to a lot of the quotes about the Star Wars, the Acolyte show. Or the only things I ever saw coming out of quotes were that. Again, some of that's just on the journals that want to push that maybe, but is about this is an important show because it's having this, or it's going to push this, or we're excited to go in this direction, and so much of it was, if not preaching, at least very ideologically driven,
message heavy,
Um,
I would say.
and from people that have been kind of turned off by it, like just so much of that approach, it turns people off. Like it doesn't invite you in the same way as just like, hey, enjoy the movie. There might be some stuff I still have a viewpoint, but like, hey,
Yeah.
this is entertaining.
And I think people respect that. I think what people don't respect is sort of the acolyte approach of like, this is a good message and you better get on board. And if you don't, then you hate people. It's like, okay, well, no, like you can make your movie and I'll be the judge of whether it's good or not. Whereas, Chung's approach, like, hey, I want to make this great movie. Like, yeah, I'm going to have a viewpoint and you can decide for yourself. I think people intuitively know and feel respected as the audience. Whereas I don't think the acolyte respects their audience in that sense. It's like, we have to make sure you understand, the message that we're trying to give
it's
to you.
making the art a platform rather than like the thing in and of itself.
Right,
It's just
right.
the opportunity. The other thing, again, we're sort of out of time, so we don't have time to get too far into this, but just, I do think disaster movies, we have an article, I encourage you to check it out, The Gospel According to Disaster Movies, up on our website, thecollision.org. And kind of in that article, I explored a bit of just like, I think there is value, beneath the surface of just the spectacle and, disaster and CGI. Like, there is a value in these types of movies. In some ways, even like similar to like the CrowdStrike discussion, as far as like something like Twisters, it sort of reminds us of like how small we actually are,
Yeah.
and, like the power of creation and stuff, without like the real world consequences of having to, because like real world disasters do that for us. Like they kind of put us in our place of like, hey, we, no matter how advanced we get, like we can lose everything in one big act of nature that we don't even fully understand. Like, so I think a movie can do that in a way that obviously with a lot less like real life death.
Yeah.
I think it also just kind of in the article, one of the other things is just, I think it does affirm the value of life, like, which is maybe not expected in a movie with like usually a high death count.
Yeah.
But I feel like what makes these movies good is you have characters, like it sort of exposes human nature as like they struggle against and like, against these powers of nature or whatever else it might be. Like they are, like seeking to live and to survive and to band together. And like, I think there is something kind of noble just about that approach.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's such a great, I think, platform to sort of explore those gospel themes and just those themes of humanity that it's just sort of, it brings to light those elements kind of in like hyper real, in a hyper real way that it's harder to get at some of those sometimes in just sort of your more like mundane film or just sort of normal life stuff. Like I think it's a great sort of focusing of who we are as people, how we are on this earth and what decisions can be made in times of crisis.
And even like, I did some work in like, the field of apologetics, and there's an argument in there, like the fine tuning argument that sort of argues, hey, nature and creation is so perfectly fine tuned, to be conducive to life that like, it points towards there must be a designer in order to, and like I feel like a lot of disaster movies, whether they do it implicitly or not, like sort of play around with that. Like a lot of these disasters come when sort of that fine tuning gets knocked out of whack, usually by humans doing something stupid, whatever that stupid
or
thing.
something semi-godlike. It's like, I think we can mitigate this by, releasing something into the atmosphere and like, it'll be great. What could possibly go wrong? And then they forget that they're dealing with complex systems, and it's like, oh, it could all go wrong. Much like releasing an update in your cybersecurity software.
Hey, basically, the moral of the story is when people get involved, things go off the walls. So I do think, hey, I've always enjoyed disaster movies. I think because they are entertaining, I think that would be Chung's first kind of, primary objective. But I do think that they do allow an avenue for Christians and just people. I think they do kind of point towards God's glory, whether they do that very overtly or not. But speaking of the old movie theater and things that you can see, whether that's a disaster movie or something, more raunchy superhero movie or something in between, we have the next segment of this podcast. We have Out Now and Coming Soon. So I feel like we've kind of already talked about most of the stuff in this section of things like the big one that's out now is Twisters. And hey, I do think it's a good movie. I think to me, this is like a summer Hollywood blockbuster. I
think I even saw a headline that was like summer Hollywood flick or something to that.
Yeah, you have a little romance, you have a little mass, spectacle of destruction. You have, You know, you have a
adventure
rocking soundtrack. Like you have an adventure. Like you have legitimate movie stars. You know, front and center. Like
tornadoes.
you have tornadoes. Hey, all the things that we like. So I do think it is a movie, and it is clean. Like there's some language in it, but like not even a whole lot of language. Like no F-bomb or anything. Like, so I do think it's clean for Christians to watch, which maybe can't be said about as far as the things coming out soon. So Deadpool Wolverine, that is the big one coming out. I'll be seeing that tomorrow as of recording this. Curious, it's tracking to do huge. I guess it's tracking to be the biggest R-rated release ever. So
yeah,
apparently there is people more excited than I am. So
who knew?
See. I don't know if it's just that I've got old and more prudish, but I just don't know if I have it in me for like sort of this raunchy comic book stuff. Like that's not what I need. And like the more adult.
I think Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman are some pretty big drivers of the excitement as well. Like they're pretty big name Hollywood guys.
Yeah, like
they know how to sell a film.
Sell. And I do think I'm sure there will be stuff in this movie that is legitimately funny.
Yeah,
because they are both funny people. But hey, I tune in next week and I'll be able to share some of my thoughts on that. But the next segment, someone that has some thoughts to share has just been off meditating on a mountain, in Canada. Ready for this next segment? We have things we like that you should like too.
Well, since meditating for so long in the great northern mountains of Canada, I've since flown at about 13 hours in a day with 2 small children, and so I've forgotten everything that I meditated on, which leads me to the thing I like this week, which is in-flight entertainment. And I sadly, they our planes didn't have like the fancy screens, but they did have like an app, and I think it's cool because you get to see movies that you maybe wouldn't otherwise see, some stuff that's not out on streaming yet. Like for example, I watched Snakes and Songbirds. Was one of the films I watched on the plane ride home, and so I think it's cool. You get to kind of experience some new entertainment, and we were on WestJet, and so there's some, like, because it's a Canadian airline, there's some French stuff on there too, and so you just get to see kind of an exposure to entertainment that you may not get on sort of your mainstream American streaming devices, and so I thought that was great. So avail yourself of the in-app entertainment maybe next time you fly. So. And
I can say too, as a parent, like, God bless in-flight entertainment.
Oh yeah,
you get the headphones on, you just open them up to this cornucopia of entertainment options, and then you just sort of ignore your child and read a book for the next 8 hours.
Yeah, exactly. So it's Coke great.
Or something as they go. That is the best. Although I do the fact that they've gone to like the apps, use your own device, like, I like to obsessively watch the flight tracker, like every minute tick off for like 7 hours, and I can't do that.
Which I think partly it's like because of our route, it's not quite long enough to be considered like a long haul flight, and so I think that's why they don't have the screens, and maybe they're just cheap, and like the quality of the plane, like if you're flying like overseas to Europe, is definitely much higher than when you're just going like to almost the other coast of the U.S. So I think it's partly that, but yeah, I always prefer if they're like the screens, especially with kids. Like it's just so much easier to deal with than like the iPad or whatever.
Yeah, and then you can obsessively watch every minute tick off.
Exactly.
There's something so satisfying about.
Yeah, you just
7 hours and 11 minutes.
Between your movies, you go back to that flight tracker. Like, oh wow, I didn't know we were gonna fly over New York.
It is the best. But hey, we are glad you guys joined us again. Like I said, we had a lot to get into, maybe a bit longer episode, but just some fun stuff to dialogue with. After Sam's been off, he just had a lot of stuff just to dive. He was
I was raring to go. Yeah, I've never had so much energy in all my life.
As he sips some more coffee. So we are glad that you have joined us. We hope you will join us again every week, every Thursday for more conversations on faith and pop culture.